Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and this is Voice of the Global South. All right then, let's get started on the show this week. Will he, won't he? World on edge as Trump mulls his options on Iran. A closer look at the intent and implications of the India-EU Defence Pact. And the heartbreaking story of a 5-year-old boy caught in Trump's immigration fury.
After what you know from the intelligence, how close are we to another war with Iran?
Well, I don't want to say that.
Trump won't say whether a war with Iran is imminent, but what he does say is this.
We have a big force going toward Iran.
And this.
I hope they make a deal. I hope they make a deal.
Now, unlike Davos, where he pledged not to use military force against Greenland, Trump maintains strategic ambiguity on Iran. But just in case Khamenei thinks that Trump doesn't mean business, he rams home the point that the U.S. Armada headed by the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln is larger than the one he dispatched to the Caribbean for capturing Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro. He also says that the U.S. military is prepared to rapidly fulfill its mission with speed and violence if necessary, and that the consequences of Iran's refusal to come to the negotiating table would be severe. Also, he invokes the 2025 U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities to warn Tehran that the next attack will be far worse. So is Trump planning to do a Venezuela on Iran? The signaling is there for all to see. Trump's Iran strategy bears an uncanny resemblance to the U.S. intervention in Venezuela, codenamed Operation Absolute Resolve. It includes naval pressure, threat of force, and ultimatums. At 86, Khamenei has retreated from daily governance and reduced his public appearances. He is believed to be living in secure locations. Day-to-day management has shifted to figures aligned with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, such as his senior advisor, Ali Larijani. The IRGC dominates Iran's security network and large parts of the economy. Khamenei retains the final authority over war, succession, and nuclear strategy. What that means is that political change in Iran is difficult until he exits the scene. So, what are Trump's options? Can the US capture Khamenei? Experts caution that a snatch and grab operation is not likely because Iran's capabilities far exceed those of Venezuela. So, capturing Khamenei is not on the cards. Eliminating Khamenei will not cut it either. Although US lawmaker Lindsey Graham, who has Trump's ear, has made a direct appeal to the US president to kill Khamenei, it is believed that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps could step in to fill the vacuum, which will only serve to further entrench hardline rule, deepen the nuclear standoff, and escalate regional tensions. That's because the IRGC's express mandate is to preserve and protect the Islamic Republic's ideology. Therefore, any successor to Khamenei who is seen as emerging from under foreign pressure would be rejected, and it could strengthen, not weaken, the IRGC. What about airstrikes then? Reuters news agency quotes an Israeli official with direct knowledge of planning between Washington, D.C. and Tel Aviv as saying that airstrikes alone cannot topple the Islamic Republic. The Israeli official is reported as saying that if you are going to topple the regime, you have to put boots on the ground, which again is not under consideration. The Israeli official goes on to say that although Iran's leadership has been weakened by the recent protests, it remains firmly in control. And therefore, only a combination of external pressure and an organized domestic opposition could shift Iran's political trajectory. Another option being discussed by Trump aides includes a much larger strike intended to have lasting impact, possibly against Iran's ballistic missile silos or nuclear enrichment facilities. Mohanad Haji Ali of the Carnegie Middle East Center in Beirut, Lebanon says U.S. military deployments to the region suggest that the Trump government's planning has shifted from a single strike to something more sustained, driven by a belief that Tehran could rebuild its missile capabilities and eventually weaponize its enriched uranium.
We will be prepared to deliver whatever this president expects of the War Department.
But Iran has already warned of quick retaliation. Ali Shamkhani, an advisor to Khamenei, says a military action by the U.S. will elicit an immediate and unprecedented response from Iran. Foreign Minister Syed Abbas Araghchi in turn says Iran's armed forces have their finger on the trigger. At the same time, he says Iran will welcome a mutually beneficial, fair and equitable nuclear deal provided it is negotiated on an equal footing and free from coercion, threats or intimidation. Similarly, Tehran's mission to the UN says it is prepared for discussions with the US, but it will defend itself if provoked. It cautions the Trump government that the last time the US blundered into wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, it squandered more than $7 trillion and lost more than 7,000 of its soldiers. In the last few days, Iran has unveiled a mural in Tehran's Inqilab Square. The mural shows damaged planes scattered across the deck of an aircraft carrier, meant as a warning to the US not to launch a military strike on Iran. An accompanying slogan in Farsi and English reads, "If you sow the wind, you will reap the whirlwind."
The movement of a warship will not affect Iran's will or determination. We possess both the resolve and the full capability to defend Iran.
So all things considered, Trump could seek to engineer a change in leadership rather than topple the regime, an outcome that would be similar to Venezuela, where US intervention replaced a president without a wholesale change of government. In other words, he wants to create conditions for a regime change. And to do so, he is looking at options to hit commanders and institutions whom the US holds responsible for the recent crackdown in order to give protesters the confidence that they could overrun government and security buildings. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio revealed the Trump government's mind when he told a committee of US lawmakers that street protests will spark up again in Iran.
That regime is probably weaker than it has ever been. And the core problem they face, unlike the protests you saw in the past on some other topics, is that they don't have a way to address the core complaints of the protesters, which is that their economy is in collapse.
But according to multiple US intelligence reports, while the economic conditions that sparked the protests remain, the upper ranks of the Iranian government appear to be intact with no major fractures. Alex Swatanka, the director of the Iran program at the Washington, D.C.-based Middle East Institute, says without large-scale military defections, Iran's protests remain, quote-unquote, heroic but outgunned. What further complicates matters for Trump is that across the region, from the Gulf to Turkey, governments favor containment over collapse, not out of sympathy for Iran, but out of fear that turmoil inside a nation of 90 million riven by sectarian and ethnic fault lines could unleash instability far beyond Iran's borders. A fractured Iran could spiral into civil war, as happened after the 2003 US invasion of Iraq. unleashing an influx of refugees, fueling Islamist militancy, and disrupting oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz, which is a global energy choke point. Vatanka warns that the gravest risk is fragmentation into early-stage Syria, with rival units and provinces fighting for territory and resources. Gulf states, which have been long-time U.S. allies and hosts American bases, fear that they would be the first targets for Iranian retaliation, which could include Iranian missiles or drone attacks from the Tehran-aligned Houthis in Yemen. India is watching too. Recently dispatched its Deputy National Security Advisor to Tehran. The official called on Ali Larijani, the Secretary of Iran's National Security Council. New Delhi voted against a recent UN Human Rights Council resolution that condemned the crackdown on protesters in Iran. India was among 7 countries which voted against the resolution. Now, all these developments take place at a time when the Trump government is seeking to increase pressure on Tehran over its uranium enrichment and its handling of domestic unrest. That said, the U.S. could still deploy the long-range B-2 stealth bombers from the Indian Ocean base of Diego Garcia. Already, according to some Western media reports, U.S. strategic bombers have left for Diego Garcia. But the absence of any regional support would mean that a U.S. operation would not have the backing of a robust international coalition. U.S. officials say that Trump is reviewing his options but has not decided whether to strike Iran. Asked about prospects for peace, Trump says he has held talks with Iran and that he is planning on having more such talks.
Well, I told him 2 things. Number 1, no nuclear. And number 2, stop killing protesters.
So, will peace be given a chance? Maybe. But a betting platform, Polymarket, which successfully predicted Maduro's capture, says a possibility of Khamenei's ouster are lower than the probability of a U.S. strike on Iran by 28th February. As they say, watch this space. We'll keep you posted. In a world teetering on the edge of uncertainty, India and the EU have forged a groundbreaking security and defense partnership. For the EU, it means diversifying from U.S. reliance amid Trump's isolationism. As for India, it stands to gain from accessing European technology and tapping European markets for exports. But that's not all. The pact also offers the tantalizing prospect of rearming Europe and sparking dreams of an EU army, which could have implications for NATO and the world at large.
Signed on 27th January in New Delhi, the Security and Defence Partnership Agreement between India and the EU isn't just another diplomatic handshake. It's a strategic pivot in a world that's growing more unpredictable by the day. At its core, the deal is a framework to deepen cooperation between India, the world's largest democracy and the most populous nation with a booming economy, and the EU, a bloc of 27 countries representing more than 440 million people. It was signed by EU High Representative Kaja Kallas and India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar on the sidelines of the EU-India Summit. The agreement entails joint initiatives on hot-button issues such as maritime security, which is vital for both given India's role in the Indo-Pacific and Europe's stake in global trade routes. The two sides will also seek to collaborate on cybersecurity, space and counter-terrorism, but defense industrial cooperation will be the game changer. Now, India and the EU can collaborate on defense projects, share technology and potentially co-develop weapon systems, everything from drones to cybersecurity tools. The new security and defense partnership will be implemented through a dedicated annual EU-India Security and Defense Dialogue.
रक्षा और सुरक्षा सहयोग किसी भी स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप की नींव होती है और आज हम इसे सिक्योरिटी एंड डिफेंस पार्टनरशिप के जरिए औपचारिक रूप दे रहे हैं। इससे काउंटर टेररिज्म, मैरीटाइम और साइबर सिक्योरिटी में हमारी साझेदारी और गहरी होगी। यह रूल्स बेस्ड इंटरनेशनल ऑर्डर के प्रति हमारी साझा प्रतिबद्धता को भी बल देगा। इंडो पैसिफिक क्षेत्र में हमारे सहयोग का दायरा और बढ़ेगा और इसके साथ हमारी डिफेंस कंपनियां को डेवलपमेंट और को प्रोडक्शन के नए अवसर साकार करेगी।
The deal is a win-win for India and the EU. It gives Europe a reliable partner in Asia amid rising tensions with China and uncertainties from US under Trump. The EU gets access to India's vast market and its growing defense tech ecosystem, including affordable and high-quality exports that could help fill gaps in Europe's supply chains. It also enhances strategic autonomy. Europe diversifies away from over-reliance on US arms, strengthening its own resilience against threats such as cyber attacks or maritime disruptions. India wins big too. New Delhi gets cutting-edge European technology to modernize its military, reducing dependence on traditional arms suppliers. It will also give a boost to Make in India push, attracting EU investments that create jobs and build local capabilities in areas such as space and AI-driven defense. That's not all. India could help rearm Europe under the EU's Rearm Europe plan. Launched in March 2025, this ambitious initiative aims to surge defense spending to $950 billion, pushing EU's military budgets towards 3.5% of GDP by the end of the decade. The Rearm Europe plan allows EU member states to make use of a $180 billion loan fund known as the Security Action for Europe for joint procurement. Adopted by the Council of the European Union in May of 2025, Security Action for Europe breaks new ground by allowing certain countries such as India, South Korea, and Japan from Asia to negotiate enhanced participation terms. It is the first pillar of European Commission's Rearm Europe plan, which aims to unlock hundreds of billions of dollars in defense spending across the EU. India's defense exports are rising, and it could supply affordable gear or co-produce with EU firms, aiding Europe's push for industrial ramp-up.
India offered a viable alternative insofar as manufacturing location or development location for defense systems was concerned, and that the EU could, in a sense, get more bang for the buck for the money that it was putting behind programs such as SAFE in the context of Rearm. Society of Indian Defense Manufacturers very recently undertook a very successful visit to Brussels to meet with their counterparts. So I think, thereby exploring opportunities for them to benefit from these various initiatives that are underway.
This deal could also potentially spur the EU to build its own army. The EU doesn't have a unified military yet. Defense remains national turf, coordinated through NATO, but Trump's threats, including over Greenland, have ignited calls for change. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is pushing a new security strategy aiming to make the EU a military powerhouse. EU Defense Commissioner Andreas Kubilius recently floated a 100,000-strong EU force and a European Security Council. Although NATO chief Mark Rutte dismisses a separate EU army as a dream, France's Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot insists that Europeans can and must take charge of their own security. The India-EU Defence and Security Partnership might not create an EU army overnight, but it's a nudge towards a more self-reliant Europe. Bureau Report, DD India.
A 5-year-old boy from Ecuador has become the face of Trump's anti-immigration raids in the U.S. Liam Ramos and his father were detained in the city of Minneapolis. Officials claim that the father was the target, not the child. But as Aman Kumar Himanshu reports, the boy's detention highlights an ongoing debate over immigration enforcement and its impact on families.
A 5-year-old boy from Ecuador returning home from preschool in the U.S. city of Minneapolis was detained by immigration officials as part of the Trump government's crackdown on migrants. Liam Conejo Ramos was taken into custody along with his father. Local officials said that Liam is the youngest of 4 minors who have recently been detained by immigration authorities in the area. But the Department of Homeland Security claimed that immigration agents did not target a child. It said that immigration agents were conducting an operation against the boy's father, an illegal alien who abandoned his son when approached. Vice President J.D. Vance also reiterated the department's claim, blaming the child's father for running and abandoning his son.
What I find is that the 5-year-old was not arrested, that his dad was an illegal alien, and then when they went to arrest his illegal alien father, the father ran. So the story is that ICE detained a 5-year-old. Well, what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to let a 5-year-old child freeze to death? Are they not supposed to arrest an illegal alien in the United States of America? If the argument is that you can't arrest people who have violated our laws because they have children, then every single parent is going to be completely given immunity from ever being the subject of law enforcement. That doesn't make any sense. No one thinks that makes any sense.
Protests erupted across the U.S. after images of Liam wearing a Spider-Man backpack and an oversized winter hat circulated online. The photograph became a powerful symbol of the human impact of anti-immigration raids, drawing outrage from parents, educators, and rights advocates. The boy's father hails from Ecuador. He had sought asylum at the U.S. border in December 2024. He has no criminal record in the U.S. state of Minnesota. There was no deportation order against him. His asylum case is still active. Liam and his father were flown across the country to a detention facility in the U.S. state of Texas. A judge in Texas has since temporarily blocked the removal of the 5-year-old and his father. In the order, the judge said that Liam and his father cannot be removed from the state of Texas pending the habeas corpus challenging their detention. The images of Liam have drawn comparisons to other haunting photographs of children caught in a conflict situation. Who can forget 2-year-old Syrian boy Alan Kurdi, who was photographed washed up on a beach in Turkey in 2015 after he drowned when the boat carrying his family, who were fleeing Syria's civil war, capsized in the Mediterranean. Or Omran Daknish, the bloodied 5-year-old boy pulled from rubble in Aleppo in 2016, representing the suffering of civilians in the Syrian conflict. Alan and Omran are not alone. There are many more such examples of children who became unintended symbols or faces of various wars and conflicts through powerful images, stories, or events that captured global attention. Remember the face of a half-buried child from the 1984 Bhopal tragedy in India. Anne Frank was a Jewish girl whose diary, written while hiding from Nazis during the Holocaust, documented the persecution of Jews. She died in a concentration camp at the age of 15, becoming a symbol of the millions of children who suffered under Nazi occupation. 15-year-old Malala Yousafzai was shot at by the Taliban in 2012 during the conflict in Pakistan's Swat Valley for advocating girls' education. She survived and became a symbol of resistance against extremism and the denial of rights to children in war zones, later winning the Nobel Peace Prize. Palestinian teenager Ehad Tamimi was arrested at the age of 16 in 2017 after a viral video showed her slapping an Israeli soldier during protests in the West Bank. She drew attention to child detentions in the occupied territories. An iconic 1972 photograph during the Vietnam War showed Phan Thi Kim Phuc running naked and burnt after a napalm attack on her village. Known as the Napalm Girl, she survived severe injuries and later became an advocate for child victims of war. Liam is not the youngest victim of Trump's immigration crackdown, though. On 22nd January, a 2-year-old girl was taken into custody along with her father in Minneapolis and flown to Texas before they were returned the next day. The father and the toddler, identified only as CRTV in court documents, are citizens of Ecuador. The child has lived in Minneapolis since her arrival in the US as a newborn and has a pending asylum application. President Donald Trump came into office promising the largest mass deportation in US history, targeting more than 10 million unauthorized migrants. Since then, data shows that border crossings have plummeted, immigration and customs enforcement arrests have doubled, and the number of people in detention is at an all-time high. After completion of 1 year in office, the White House released a report that says that President Trump has delivered transformative results with the most accomplished first year of any president term in modern US history. The White House report says that more than 2.6 million illegal aliens have been removed from the US and 0 illegal aliens released into the country's homeland for 8 consecutive months, restoring deterrence at the border. Undocumented immigration remains a major issue in US politics. About 52% of all US immigrants were born in Latin America, highlighting the region's central role in migration to the US. In addition to the large numbers from Mexico and Cuba, over 1 million immigrants come from El Salvador, Guatemala, the Dominican Republic, Colombia, Honduras, and Venezuela, reflecting the diverse origins of Latin American migrants to the US. US states, long known for welcoming immigrants, were hit the hardest. For example, the US state of California felt the sharpest impact of President Trump's immigration crackdown, with international migration plunging dramatically. California saw international migration drop nearly 70% compared to the previous year, highlighting the far-reaching effects of US immigration policies. New US Census Bureau data released on the 27th of January shows that the US population grew by 1.8 million last year, the slowest rate since the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. In December 2025, the US government launched Operation Metro Surge, flooding the Minneapolis-St. Paul region with 3,000 immigration agents, part of the largest immigration enforcement effort in recent history. Public anger intensified after Renee Good, a 37-year-old mother of 3, was shot dead by an immigration agent on the 7th of January, and again after the fatal shooting of Alex Pretty. In response to the backlash, President Trump sent border czar Tom Homan to lead the operation and said that his government would work more closely with state and local officials on enforcement. Homan has since acknowledged that immigration and border control operations in Minneapolis could be improved. He appeared to signal a shift in the enforcement strategy, saying that immigration officials would focus on targeted strategic enforcement operations, prioritizing immigrants who pose public safety threats or have criminal records. Aman Kumar Himanshu for DD India.
And with that, it's a wrap. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.